Here's another XX game put out under the Lonnie title. I don't believe it's written by Mr. Orgler, although he has design credits, so I don't know. But we got this Polkatech Zeleznius and Chekachik Zimich. I would guess they're the actual designers of it. I'm not sure. So, I've seen a fair number of the Lonnie games. He's been cranking them out, and a lot of people love them. I find them generally on the positive side of the XX ratio, which, since I'm an XX fan, means that overall I like them a lot. But they're not at the for the most part, they're not the cream of the crop for me. I got hopes for the one under here. I hear it's a particularly tight version of the Italian rails design, so we'll see. But anyway, there's certain conceits with these designs that follow a certain flavor that I see the reasons for. I'm not sure I completely that they completely appeal to me. This is our first playing for this entirely. I haven't fiddled around with it at all. I have looked at the rules and I said, you know what? They're simple enough that I think I can pick them up without too much complexity. The big concept here appears to be a different means of forming state railroads than we've seen in other games that I've seen. But there are a number of interesting concepts in it. You can see there's a lot of crap, right? I mean, there's this whole board. We got the stocks board here. We got this thing. This is how the privates companies are distributed. We've got a pile of cash that I'm not going to use because it takes up a lot of space and it's too hard, but it's kind of cool. It's not particularly attractive, but it's got various Czech personalities running through it, which, historical figures of importance, which kind of pleases me. I don't know if they made it onto real Czech money at any point. I would imagine post-communist if it's Kafka, but whatever. And let's see, what else do we have here? Yeah, so there are actually 3 boards. There's one on the reverse of this, and then another one, I think, on the reverse of this, for 3 different scenarios. I'm going to play the biggest of the scenarios, but the others, there's a 2-player game, for example, and then one that's meant for 2 or 3 players. This one is meant, I think, more for 4 or 5 players. It can hold as little as 3, supposedly, and as many as 6, but I'm not playing with the 6 because they specifically say it was not designed for 6. You can try it out that way. I would also, you can see with all this stuff on the board, on the table, and a lot of different corporations, I may be taxed here in terms of this table. I thought about bringing it up to the loft, but I don't know. I'm just having difficulties facing that concept for whatever reason. I've gotten kind of hooked into here. Plus, I got my little heater and my pipe stuff is nearby and everything. And it's not like there's any real reason not to be here anymore. You have a lot of different track types. Some of them have these little purple borders. Those are going to be related to the private companies. You can't play them but for the private companies. You have tiles instead of red spaces on the board. So most XX games have kind of fixed red spaces. Here you have actually an option, and those are the state-run railways, which don't appear very big, but we'll see. I think they get big. You have Y-type tracks, which are more valuable cities than others. You have UUs in this game, including one with a corporate start. You have a bunch of different types of trains. So initially, the 2 trains are all you have. But eventually, you get up to 3 different types of trains represented on a single card. And that's because there's 3 different types of corporations in the game. Small ones, which is all you have at the start of the game, medium ones, and big ones. The big ones are the state railroads. And all of them follow similar rules, but they each use a different type of train with slightly different rules. And let's see, what else do we have? An unlimited bank. Let me get these off the board. A bunch of extra counters for station counters. Why? These are sort of an option. They're not explained in the rules, but as companies fold into each other, more tokens become available to larger corporations. So there's kind of an interesting factor around that. And I'll probably use those as much as I can. We have the track manifests here with a different way to build that, which is important probably if you're playing with the board that's on that side. Put these aside. Some cheat sheets that probably were printed out, but they're on pretty good stock. I don't know. I don't know if these came with the game or the prior owner printed them out on some decent stock. You have a little cheat sheet to determine how much money you actually get for various share values, because there's kind of a weird rule for that. So I'm going to keep one of them out because that'll be helpful. You have you have player order cards, of course, which is a pretty standard thing. Like in some of the other Lonnie games, the order at which you play is actually not the order in which you play in stock rounds is determined by the amount of cash you have left over. I'm always a little iffy about this. Certainly, it gets rid of the "where are you sitting" problem in an XX game, but it does make for determining who has to go next and the ordering a little bit more complex. But it's probably something that affects me more solo than in any other condition. Flat stock chart. Limited amount of turns. It is strictly you play X number of operating rounds, essentially, with stock rounds intermixed in between. You've got train export in it. You got this counter that I don't need. You've got some, and this does not have anything on the reverse, unfortunately. You've got some written in Czech, I believe, explanations of how the values move. It's not too bad. These color schemes here are to indicate what the starting values of corporate shares are. And you get a little track to keep track of current run value. You got this kind of thingy, which indicates, and again written in Czech, the rules come in three languages. Luckily they come in English and German, but they also, the main rule set, like there's this huge thick German-English rule set that you have to deal with, but there's also a Czech specific one. And I find that kind of appealing that the game is written, in the language of the country that it represents. I assume that there's a fairly rich Czech following to XX, and that's kind of pleasing too. But it does make, you've got a bigger, thicker set of rules. The rules themselves are written, as is often the case with the Lonnie games, in a very sparse style. It may not be the best thing to introduce you to an XX game, but as an XX player, it's a really, really good way to express, the game without a lot of extra wordiness. You understand the base concepts. Let's not spell them out too much. I'm not sure how bad it would be for a new player. I'm not sure how good it would be either. Yeah, I don't see the cheat sheet in here, so I'm assuming that it is an option, something somebody printed out for the game. But I don't know. So you start off with some cash. Let's take a look at the actual rules. So the local railways, well, there's basically 3 local railways and many copies of them. They don't really matter. Their prices, I believe, are listed over here. This is the amount of money they make each operating round. And again, each column is exactly the same company. You don't have to worry about it doesn't associate to anything on the map. Their special abilities are written here. So they have special abilities where they can reduce the cost of going through terrain that has a cost listed on it, something we're used to. Here, now let's see. Yeah, these are pretty readable. We've got a new type of terrain. So there's mountains and rivers, but there's also hills, which cost more moderate. And what you'll see is the little ones can cross rivers without paying the fee. The next size can cross hills, and then finally it's the mountains. But also, as an option, you can use the ability to lay these purple bordered tracks, which are in some cases the only way you can get certain track. So for example, these junctions that are higher valued can only be gotten through the purple border track. And the same thing with the brown track, which can only upgrade the green purple border track. The only way to get those is by expending a miner for it, private. Likewise, though, we have a couple of city spaces that are really the same as cities that are on the board, but maybe all the track's been used up and you really need to be able to upgrade. It might be worth that expenditure to upgrade an important city to you. Similarly, we have the brown upgrades. All combine them into a city. That's interesting. Again, something that you can use your private to cause. And finally, all the gray track requires a private to upgrade. So, and this expends your private. These are the tiles that go in here, in those things. There's one of those tiles for each of the biggest companies, the state-held railways. There's a little bit of track written on the board, not a whole lot. You get some here. That has a specific tile. Actually, it has choices of tiles that it can upgrade to, and then it has Ps that upgrade further as you go for other colors that I think are not choice. They're not based on your initial choice. They just upgrade to that. You have the starting locations of corporations written on the map. Nothing funky there. Okay. Let's go back here. Okay. The local railways, these are your privates. I'm going to call them that from now on, even though it calls them locals. They're like normal privates. They don't lay track. They don't run trains. Their share price is determined by which time in the game that you're in, and it increases as it goes. That limits the price that you can sell it to a corporation for, and also its value at the end of the game. But the game always ends in the same place. Also the value that a corporation can sell it back to the bank. Once the first B train, okay, so trains are not called ones, twos, etc. And there's some overlap. We can look at the chart for that, but basically, in some cases, a train is the same as another train. So here, Wow, I'm on the C's. Did I forget the B's? I left the B's not deployed. So, for example, the first the small version of the B train is exactly the same as the only A train that's available. But the medium version of the B train, which is the blue, the 2+2, is able to be purchased as well. And you'll have that kind of overlap going. And as you get late in the game, only the big company, only the state railroads get bigger and bigger trains. The other companies sort of level off. You can still buy trains for them, and trains still rust, but earlier trains rust, but they rust by their letter, which is kind of different from most games that you'll see. So anyway, after the first B train is bought, corporations can buy the local railways, the privates, and they can pay anywhere between it's in thousands, but let's just call it $1 to the price, to the current share value, which is on this track, of the company. Now, remember, your initial share value is only 40 in these companies, but you're paying, well, for the little guys, not so much. But for the bigger guys, you're paying a lot more. So you're not going to want to just cash those in. You'll lose money on them. You're going to want to wait until they get more valuable, but maybe you need them for your company. So who knows? Okay. So the local railways are going to pay their income, which is written on them, 5, 10, or 20, each operating round, I believe. And whatever. Okay. Now, a local railway that's owned by a company pays the income to the company, and it can use one of the special powers that the private has. When you use either of the special powers, it flips the card over to where those special powers are kind of grayed out. And I don't know if that's going to be very visible, but you have a choice of special powers. Do you want to reduce the price of some terrain you're building, or do you want to play a purple bordered tile? The purple bordered tiles definitely look more valuable in general, but I don't know, unless you're going to be creating a junction or need a city, some of these smaller guys have less valuable purple bordered tiles. Of course, this is only a $10 bonus as opposed to the later ones, which allow you to negate the costs of hills and even mountains entirely. I'm not sure how big a deal cash in the companies is. To me, it feels like those bordered tiles are by far the more important thing. But again, time is limited, and cash may be incredibly important here. You're also allowed to sell your local railway from a corporation back to the bank. This is the only way to kill these things, and you get the current value in your corporate treasury. So again, another way to bring money into your corporation. But you want to make sure you use your special ability before you do that, I think. Okay. I'm going to skip over a lot of stuff that's kind of, what I'm looking at here that's kind of common to XX games. I'm only going to bring out the things that are special here. So we have 3 different companies or corporations. We have the small ones, which only have 3 certificates, a 50% and 2 25%. And you're going to pay either, let me leave that alone. So they're only allowed I think you pay the per share price, which means this will be twice the share price for the president's certificate. And that's the case across the board. It's just you have a bigger share of the income the company makes. Now, those small companies are also more limited in terms of the cash they have. So they might not be viable late in the game, actually. There are other reasons to get rid of them beyond being not viable. They're only allowed to run the small trains, which are the red ones, and those work like your normal XX trains. They run that many locations, can't skip anything, and generate an income, and they count the doinks as full locations and whatnot. What is this 10K here? I guess the first upgrade costs you money. Okay. They are only allowed to purchase the small local railways. And they have 3 station markers. Now what you'll see here is, okay, there's 3 station markers. There's 2 more markers. One is for stock value, and one is for the current operating price. And everything's double printed, backside printed as well. Oh, interesting thing here. I've seen this with other Lonnie games. The choice between, hey, do you want that or do you want that? I'm used to my old XX style graphics, so I don't want all those little rails drawn in. That's just me. The medium companies or corporations are 40, 20, 20, 20. They can only run medium trains. The blue ones, which are 2+2 train, for example, which means it hits 2 regular size, it hits 4 locations, only 2 of which can be full-sized cities, the circles, not the doinkers. And they're allowed to buy and purchase small and medium local railways, and they have 3 station markers. Now, something that I haven't gotten to yet, and I will, and this was kind of the big jaw dropper to me, the only thing in the game that really shocked me, is the medium corporations can buy and own small corporations, and then they just kind of absorb them. And likewise, the large ones can buy and own small and medium corporations, in addition to owning the privates. Okay, so finally we hit the large and these also have 3 station markers. The large corporations are your normal 10-share companies with a 20% directorate. They can only run large trains. Those are E-trains. The E-trains are able to skip doinkers. That's their only special ability. Now, this is a little weird because when you get to the E-trains, they're more expensive than, significantly more expensive than the normal red trains are for the same level. Yes, they have a special ability to skip doinkers, but what that means is if you're building for your big corporation, you kind of don't care. You're okay with adding doinkers in. Medium corporations kind of want doinkers in their route, and the small ones really don't want them. So we'll see how that all plays out and what is happening. Again, once you get to the big corporations, you don't care what was set up in terms of track. But there may be players who focus more on the medium companies and try to set up track that works better for them. We shall see, because those are also timed. You're not allowed to build the medium corporations until a certain level train comes into the play. So what do we get here? The large corporations, they can buy and possess any type of train. Remember, I didn't say this. The medium can buy and possess small and medium trains. Why would you want a small train? Because you can't run it. Likewise here, you can only run the large train. Well, You can hold them for someone else. You can buy them for someone else. You're going to be allowed to sell trains between corporations pretty freely here. And they only have 2 station markers. Hey, aren't these the big corporations? Yeah, but remember they can absorb smaller corporations, and that's why we have these pieces here, is to do so. You do a pre-stock round in which you can buy the local railway companies, and then you follow the normal order: stock round, operating round, stock round, operating round, and then multiple operating rounds between stock rounds. In the pre-stock round, you can buy off that chart, and only that. Starting with the first player, and then doing sort of the reverse snake, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? You're allowed to buy local railways at the current price. Now remember, these guys can't be sold to corporations at the beginning of the game. However, they pay off nicely. If you take a look, this pays 1/5 of its initial starting price. This pays more than 1/3. This pays 1/4. However, as you go further down the chart, these become more expensive for what they give you. So you probably will find yourself buying the optimal stuff that'll get you money. I'm not sure, though. There's a lot of money of privates here. We may end up buying all the, it depends on what the players are looking at. You don't have a whole lot of money. You have $250, and I am seeing what? 110, 240, 390, say 400 there already. I don't know, 400, 480, 590, 710, 720, 770, 840. So I'm looking at like $930, say around $900 for sweeping the whole pile. Well, with 5 players, we have 1,250 in play. That's not leaving much money for anybody to buy corporations. So what's going to be hard to determine is what the value of a private is. So for example, this one is paying me 20 per turn per operating round and only cost me 55, but this one is paying me 20 and it cost me 80. Is this still worth it, or do I want to invest in stocks? And at some point or another, that it may be that I have to make that decision, and that's going to be hard to decide without having played it at all. But we'll learn. I didn't feel like doing a pre-play for various reasons because the game seemed simple enough. But again, this is a concept that I don't know if you're going to screw yourself over by buying a lot of privates. Certainly, it's a way to change the game and shake it up quite a bit. Okay, so you're allowed to pass on an option to buy a local railway. If all players pass, though, in turn, we end the pre-stock round. And then we determine the seating order. Whoever has the least money gets the lowest number playing order card. Second least takes the second. And then we go to the regular stock round. In the regular stock round, you buy and sell shares as normal. Shares are available for the bank always from the bank at the current share price. There is no bank pool. There is just these piles, and the corporations don't hold the shares. The bank holds the shares for you. What do we got here? You can sell as many shares as you wish within certain limitations of what you're allowed to sell, and those are standard for XX. And then you're allowed to buy 1 certificate, You can choose to pass, and once everybody passes, we're done with the stock round as usual. First person is whoever has the lowest number player order card. Next is the next. It ends when every player is passed in sequence. The player with the most money at the end of the stock round takes the lowest number playing order card. This is the opposite, and Lonnie games have this tendency. This is the opposite of what you had with the initial stock round, right? The pre-stock round, whoever has the least money has the first option to buy a real corporation. But normally in the stock round, it's whoever has the most money has maintained that capability of initiative. Remember, I mentioned that trains are easily moved around in this game, which means rape is quite possible. There's a lot of corporations. There's no real limitation of, oh my God, I might get stuck without a corporation. So, like many games with shuffling orders, you may not want to be holding 2 shares of anybody's corporation. Certainly if you're like me. Purchasing shares. First stock round, only small companies are available. Medium become available once the B trains have been brought out, even through export. Large corporations once the D train comes out. The first certificate has to be the director's certificate. You set the initial share price as normal, pay the multiples of shares in that. We'll get to that in a bit. I'm not absolutely certain I understand that. You can't take loans when you're buying shares. If you've sold shares in a company in a stock round, you can't buy that same company back in the same stock round. You don't get that ability till the next stock round. Buying and selling guarantees you'll get to go again because not everybody has passed. You can change directorships. 50% is the floating number on every corporation. There's a certificate limit. In 5 players, it's going to be 10 certificates per player. Local railways count as certificates. The director's certificate is a single certificate, all standard stuff. You can own up to 60% of medium and large companies and 75% of a small company. If you exceed your certificate limits because you lost a directorship, then your next stock round you have to fix that. Inaugurating a stock company. As soon as you buy a company, you set the initial share price. The initial share prices for small companies, medium companies, large companies. When at least 50% of the shares in a company have been purchased, the company's floated immediately. The director's charter is put out. You're fully capitalized. And that's explained here. The company starts to act in the next operating round. It'll place its station token in its home base. It's allowed to lay 2 yellow tiles on its first track play of the game in its first operating round, or 2 yellow track plays, or it's allowed to do an upgrade. And from then on, you're only allowed 1 track play, as in 1830. When you float, you receive money for all the shares in your initial capital. For small companies, this is going to be 4 times the initial share price. Yeah, it's a per share. So there are 4 shares of a small company. You're not worried about percentages there. And change of director. This is all pretty standard. You can't sell the presidency into the bank. Shares can be sold. They're returned to the bank up there. You cannot sell shares in the very first stock round of the game. You cannot sell the director's certificate directly, but you can exchange it as normal. Local railways may not be sold during a stock round. You have to sell them through a company, and then the company can sell them to the bank. If you're selling shares in different companies, you choose the order they're sold, and those prices are going to move. Okay. I am going to skip ahead to where the prices move because I feel like that's an important thing. So they talk about dividends here, but in the stock round, when shares are sold, no matter how many shares a given player sells, it moves to the left diagonally. This is something you'll see in some of the more recent games. I think mainly Lonnie games. At the end of the stock round, if all available shares are in player's hand, it moves diagonally to the right. And if it's at the 370 mark, it stays there. And I think the same is with the 40. It doesn't go bankrupt or anything like that. This is just the minimum price that any shares can go to. Okay. Operating rounds. Let me swap batteries. And this is the kind of parsimony these rules have. During an operating round, it is not the players who take actions, but the private companies and the share companies. How a company acts is determined solely by its director. That could be expressed in a paragraph in most rule books. This is enough, but sometimes there's a hump to get over that understanding. That's just the kind of thing that I wanted to point out as why you might not want to take one of these as your first game. They're not that. It's just very, very, very precise and very concise. Okay. The first thing that happens, as usual, all the privates pay out their payment, which is the 20, 10, or 5, either to the corporation that owns them or to the player that owns them. And then following normally highest stock price to lowest, each of the corporations gets to run. And the first thing that you can do is you're allowed to build track. You get up to play 2 yellow track tiles on your very first starting round. Otherwise, you're allowed to play 1 yellow or do an upgrade. You're allowed to buy and place station markers. That doesn't sound limited. I didn't notice that before. Run your trains to earn revenue, calculate the income, acquire 1 or more smaller companies. This is the exciting part where you can buy another corporation with the agreement of that player. Now what that means in practice is probably you will be buying your own corporations. But there might be times when there's a synergy that makes a lot of sense that might be worth paying something advantageous, and then buying trains. Okay, lane track. All the rules are pretty much your standard 18xx rules for this. They go into some specifics about the red tiles because they're new. You're allowed to, I believe, run track to them. They're not truly off-board locations as red spaces are in most XX games. You're allowed to run track to places, to sides of the thing that are either not yet placed or are not placed correctly, which is a little weird. That may be wrong, actually. I would have to look it up if somebody wants to run. Yeah, a track tile may be built such that it heads to a red edge hex, even if no red tile may be played on this red edge hex. I would have to look at the specifics of that. But yeah, everything is more or less as you expect. The tile promotion, yellow, green, brown, gray. The green becomes available on the D train, the brown on the G train. Now, I don't know what the numbers of those are. I would have to look them up. Maybe that's in the cheat sheet. So, let's see. What do we got? The D train is... It's not clear to me. It is not clear to me what is on there. And then we have this weird 4 here. Yeah, I honestly don't know how I can read this. I don't think I'm going to read that. Okay, so we'll skip down there. The purple edge tiles, like I said, you can only use it by expending your local railway's power, but they can later be upgraded by anything that follows the appropriate rules. That's not purple edged. So if I upgrade to one of these cities, I think this is the only case where that happens, someone else can upgrade to a brown city that doesn't have a purple edge around it. You have to maintain all track as usual, just everything is pretty much standard here. It's all very, again, precisely and concisely laid out. UUs are colored yellow. That indicates that only green track, that they are first placed with green track. I believe that is counted as an upgrade, yeah. So you can't lay the first UU and another. There's one special case, the ATE company, it starts on an UU. It is reserved both of these dots until it chooses one, basically. So you can't shut it out by being a dick. There's no cost to upgrade tracks unless you're upgrading one of these that has a cost. Which isn't really upgrading. Establishing stations. When you place tokens on a city circle, the token becomes a railway. Yeah, we know that. You get your first token for free. During your turn in an operating round, you can place one token in a city circle to create a station. Yeah, so you're only allowed to place one, but it can be in addition to your home station. The first additional station you place costs you 40. Each additional is going to cost 100. And otherwise, station rules are pretty standard. Operating trains, again, pretty much standard rules for these. You can't run over the same piece of track twice. You can't hit the same city with the same train twice. You can hit both cities on an UU twice. I believe whatever this is. I thought it was Prague. Maybe it is Prague. No, this is Prague. I believe Prague is counted as a single city, no matter what. And that's actually spelled out here, even when it's let me see. It is not allowed to travel from Praha to Praha, including on a yellow or green tile, or if Praha has no tile. Yeah, so you can't go from Prague to Prague. It's considered one city all the time, not a bunch of separate cities. That's a little confusing, but okay. It's a special case. I've already explained how the different trains are run and collect their income. Red tiles are always going to be terminal tiles. It's possible that you might have a token here. If you have a token here, if your company is the one that put this down and it's your home station, you get this plus 50 bonus for what you run outside of Czech territory. Multiple routes by one company have to be completely separate. Revenue is all standard. The only special thing here is the E-trains are able to skip dots, doinkers. That's their special ability. The director gets to either pay out or not pay out. Simple swallow choice there. If he pays out, you move one directly to the right. If he does not pay out, he moves one directly to the left, with one exception for the paying out. The large corporations will pay out. They move 2 spaces to the right. No matter how shitty their payout is, unless it's 0, of course. Dividends, there's a rounding rule on this. if you own like 25% of a company, you might get an extra buck than if you you get the rounding in your favor, basically, in each case. But if you own 50% of the company, you don't get the rounding twice. It balances out, as would make sense. Okay, here's the special stuff. Acquisition of a smaller company. After running your trains and before purchasing any new trains, you can acquire smaller companies, and that can be multiple in one operating round. All shares of the smaller company in player hands get compensation. The director of the larger company announces a price per share for the smaller company that's between 50 and 150% of its actual share price. If the director of the smaller company agrees, the acquisition takes place. The announced price per share is paid to each smaller company in cash from the larger company's treasury. So you have to have cash to buy these smaller companies. If the money in the larger company's treasury is insufficient, the transaction is not allowed. You cannot use money in the smaller company to fund this. But you could be buying a company for less than it has in its treasury. You can't force anyone to do this, even at 150%. They can refuse. So what happens after you pay? Well, the larger company gets the smaller company's treasury, any local railways, and any non-place station markers. These will cost $100 each. The stations on the map are now part of the larger company, and we could swap in those extra counters to whatever extent is possible. The smaller company will actually be kind of folded under the larger company's charter so that you can tell that they own it. The trains of the smaller company can be taken over, but they can also be scrapped voluntarily. This is one of the few times in this game where you can just toss out a train if you don't want it. Any train or trains that were taken over can be changed to a larger train that's on the same train card by paying the difference between the old and the new train price, if it's greater than 0. If the new train price is equal or lower than the old one, there's no payoff or compensation. Don't know how likely, I didn't know that's possible, but okay. Voluntary train scrapping and changing to a larger train can only happen at this moment. The share price marker of the smaller company is now taken from the game, and all shares of the smaller company go away after the compensation's been played. You don't have to connect the two corporations. You can buy something out. Now, here's the deal. The big company can only run trains that the smaller company couldn't even hold, right? So, if you didn't upgrade, you're just, and you hold the trains, you're just holding them for other companies to buy from you. If, however, you can now run on that new company, on that new portion of the corporation's track. Okay, what about buying trains themselves? You must have a train which you could run, i.e. it's the right type of train for your corporation. If you do not, you must buy a train. There's a maximum number of trains any company can hold based on the game phase, etc. And that's actually, yeah, I don't know. I can't read this thing. I can read the other charts, the ones that come with the game. Okay. If you already hold the maximum number of trains, you're not allowed to buy a new train, even if this would scrap some trains and bring you within limit. However, there is an exception. If a phase change leaves a company with only trains the company can't run, it must still buy a train that it can run, and it may have to then return a train to the train pool without compensation. I think that means it goes on top of the pile and is now available to buy, and that could actually cause problems for people. Otherwise, the new trains have to be bought in ascending order. Companies can also buy trains from other companies if both directors agree. This has to be at least $1, and it can only happen after the sale of the first B train. The purchase of trains from another company always happens during the buying company's turn. You can never sell trains back to the bank. Trains can never be scrapped voluntarily. You may own smaller trains in order to sell them to other companies. If you're forced to buy a train and you don't have enough cash in the treasury, then you have to emergency finance. It's a little different in this game. Kind of reminds me of, and maybe this is where he got it, the 22 Mars and maybe 21 Moon have financing rules that are kind of like this, but this is a little different from that. The train can be bought only from the bank or the train pool, not from another company. That is the first big difference. The director cannot buy an additional train beyond that first one that he's forced to buy out of his pocket. If different trains are available, though, then the director selects which to buy. He doesn't have to buy the cheapest train. He can buy one that actually is useful to him. Which I think you should probably be doing, because otherwise you might have a problem. The company can't have any money left after the purchase. If the director doesn't have enough cash, he doesn't sell shares in this game. He takes out a loan. Now that loan is going to cause an interest penalty equal to 100% of the amount you borrowed. And this will just be a penalty at the end of the game. You don't have to pay it back. You don't have to pay any interest on it or anything like that. This is a different situation. If you miss by a little bit, that might be a lot better than losing a share of something that's going to produce money. If you miss by a lot, this could be horrible. If you are in debt, okay, so then you will have a debt of negative money as well as that minus 100% interest penalty. You don't have to pay the interest penalty off, but you have to pay the debt off. And you have to pay it off in the next stock round. Or you cannot buy shares until you've paid it off. Payment can be made at any time during a stock round, and payment of the entire debt is required if you want to buy more shares. Unpaid debt, if you have any, is also subtracted from you at the end of the game if you chose not to buy any shares. Okay, what about the phases? Phase A, yellow, train limit for all companies is 3. Phase B, buying trains from other companies is allowed, buying local railways allowed, and the medium companies become available. Phase C, nothing changes. Phase D, the green train is available, or green tiles are available, and you use green values on the red tiles. You can now buy large companies. Phase E, if a 4 train is sold, scrap all 2 trains. The train limit for smaller companies is reduced to 2. And this is actually all expressed nicely. Like I said, there are scenarios for this one. This is all expressed nicely somewhere over here. I found this train chart much, much more useful and understandable. And it tells you how many of each train, what the costs of the different sizes are. So you can look here. A 5 train costs $350. Which is the same as a 4E. But if you get to this one where there's a 5 and a 5E, the difference is $350 still. That's going to stay the same for the rest of the game to $700. So, train limit for small companies drops to 2. Phase F is the first F train. A 4+4 is sold. That scraps the 2+2s. So this is kind of interesting. The letter of your train doesn't scrap the trains. It has to be the precise type of train that follows. And train limit for medium companies goes down to 2. Phase G, brown tiles become available. Brown value for red tiles is used. If a 5 train is sold, all the 3 trains and 2 trains are scrapped. It's possible that nobody bought a 4 train. Phase H, if a 5+5 is sold, all 3+3s and 2+2s, if not already gone, die, and the train limit for small companies drops to 1. Phase I, Gray tiles are available. If a 6E is sold, the 3Es are scrapped. I think they're the lowest valued E train. Train limit for mediums drops to 1. And then finally, the first J train, if an 8E is sold, all 4 Es are scrapped, along with 3 Es. And the train limit for large companies drops down to 2. When trains are scrapped, okay. The purchase of a train scraps only trains of the same type. Red trains only scrap red, and so on. When a train is sold, okay. At the end of each set of stock and operating rounds, there is an export. And this is just scrapping a train. A train of each type is removed from the game, which could cause a scrapping of every train of that type. So it's unlikely that you'll end up in a situation where a later train crashes some earlier ones that shouldn't have gotten removed. Share price of a company is located on the share price chart. We've already talked about this. In the operating round, the dividends I talked about. When the game process marker reaches the last space of the chart, the last operating round is played. After that, the game's over. Company assets in the form of trains and capital have no significance. Local railways are worth their current share price of 120. All your money and current value of shares minus any penalties and unpaid debts is your wealth, and that is what determines how you win. I'm a little intrigued to see how this, this train corporation acquisition works compared to the mergers type rules that we've seen, and then also the formation rules from miners that we've seen in other games. That's the big deal in this one, and it'll be neat to see. I'm also very intrigued to see how this and how I screw up the purchases of miners, of the privates. The privates are going to be a little weird. Lonnie games, a number of them have miners in them. This one does not, but it does have multiple different size companies, lots and lots of companies. Should be kind of interesting to see how I'm expecting this to play out a little differently from most. Just when I thought I was getting tired of the games of this flavor,